See that $12 million resort behind me? The one with the marble fountains and valet parking? Yeah, that's built on my grandfather's farm. The farm my family owned for 70 years before some HOA witch decided she wanted it. I can still smell the fresh cow manure mixing with her expensive perfume the day she showed up demanding $450,000 in violation fees, said my roosters were too loud, said my barn was an eyesore, said I had 30 days to pay up or she'd take everything. Patricia Whitmore thought she was dealing with some dumb country boy who'd roll over and play dead. She was wrong. Dead wrong. That woman is now serving 3 years in federal prison, and I'm about to tell you exactly how we took her down. But first, what would you do if someone tried to steal your family's land? Drop that in the comments. And where are you watching from? I want to see this story go worldwide. Let me take you back to where this whole mess started. My grandfather, Earl Morrison, bought this 127 acres back in 1952 with nothing but a handshake loan and a promise to pay it back in milk money. Built it into one of the finest dairy operations in East Tennessee. 3 barns, a creek running right through the middle, and enough pasture to keep 40 head of cattle fat and happy. This wasn't just land to Earl, it was his life's work. Every fence post he set by hand, every barn board he nailed himself. He used to tell me, "Jake, a man's not measured by what he owns, but by what he builds for the next generation." When Earl passed in 2019, he left me everything. The farm, the memories, and unfortunately, $89,000 in medical debt. I'm Jake Morrison, 34 years old, been swinging a hammer for a living since I was 18. Not exactly equipped to run a dairy operation, but I'll be damned if I was going to let some bank take away what my grandfather bled for. The first sign of trouble came in 2020 when they started building Willowbrook Estates right next door. Suddenly my farm wasn't surrounded by tobacco fields and old-growth oak trees anymore. Now I had McMansions worth $400,000 to $800,000 staring down at my weathered barn like it was some kind of historical embarrassment. The HOA formed before the first family even moved in. That should have been my first red flag, but I was too busy trying to figure out how to pay off Earl's medical bills to pay attention to a bunch of city folks playing neighborhood politics. Then I met Patricia Whitmore, and everything went to hell. Picture this. It's 7 in the morning, I'm out feeding the chickens, and this pristine white BMW X5 comes crunching up my gravel drive like it owns the place. Out steps this perfectly coiffed woman in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She's got that fake Southern belle accent that sounds sweet as molasses, but cuts like a razor blade. "Good morning," she says, stepping carefully around a puddle in those designer heels. "I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I believe we need to discuss your problem. Now, I've been dealing with roosters crowing at dawn my whole life. But apparently that's a violation when you've got neighbors who think country life should be as quiet as a meditation retreat." Patricia's standing there with a clipboard, tick-tock ticking off violations like she's reading a death sentence. "Excessive noise before 8 a.m., she says, pointing at my rooster like he's a criminal. "Unsightly agricultural structures visible from the road. Odors affecting neighboring property values." She pauses, wrinkling her nose at the smell of fresh manure mixing with her expensive perfume. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sure you understand that things have changed around here. We have standards to maintain." I'm gripping that fence post so tight I can feel the splinters digging into my palm. "Lady," I tell her, "my grandfather was milking cows here when all this was tobacco fields. You got a problem with roosters. Maybe you shouldn't have built your fancy houses next to a working farm." She gives me this smile that doesn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I think you'll find that's not quite how it works anymore. The Willowbrook Estates covenants clearly state that any activities affecting the community's quality of life can be subject to mitigation fees. $500 per month should cover the inconvenience to your neighbors. $500 per month for the crime of farming land my family had owned for 70 years. And if I refuse, I ask?" That smile gets even colder. "Well, then I suppose we'll have to explore other legal remedies. I'm an attorney, Mr. Morrison. I'm sure you'd prefer to handle this reasonably rather than expensively." As she's walking back to her BMW, my German Shepherd Rex starts barking his head off. The sound echoes off those fancy houses like he's announcing war. Patricia flinches, nearly stumbles on her heels, and shoots me a look that could freeze hell over. That's when I knew this wasn't about noise complaints or property values. This was about power. and Patricia Whitmore had just declared war on the wrong farmer's grandson. Patricia didn't waste any time showing me what other legal remedies looked like. 2 weeks after our little fence post chat, I got a certified letter that made my blood pressure spike higher than a July thermometer. Environmental Protection Agency complaint, filed by concerned citizens about potential groundwater contamination from my cattle operation. But here's the kicker. The complaint included technical language about nitrogen runoff coefficients and bacterial load thresholds that no ordinary neighbor would know. This was a professional hit job. The EPA inspector showed up on a Tuesday morning in a government sedan, looking about as comfortable on my farm as a penguin in Phoenix. Nice enough guy. Reminded me of my high school science teacher, but he had a job to do. Water samples from my creek, soil samples from the pasture, even air quality measurements around the barn. Just following up on a complaint, he tells me, pulling on rubber gloves. Probably nothing to worry about, but someone filed a very detailed report. We have to check these things out. 3 weeks later, I got the results along with a bill for $3,200. Every single test came back cleaner than a preacher's conscience. Water quality excellent. Soil composition perfect. Air quality better than downtown Nashville on a good day. But that didn't matter. I still owed the EPA for their time in testing. While I'm trying to figure out how to pay for EPA tests on a construction worker's salary, the local newspaper runs a front-page story. Farm practices under investigation. Not farm cleared of environmental concerns or false complaint costs taxpayers money. Just under investigation, like I was running some kind of toxic waste dump instead of raising cattle. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I drove down to the county clerk's office. You know, that musty old building that smells like coffee and 40 years of bureaucratic paperwork. And started pulling public records. HOA formation documents, development permits, legal filings. All public information, all available for the price of photocopying. And that's where I found the smoking gun. Patricia's law firm, Whitmore & Associates, had handled every single piece of legal work for Willowbrook Estates development. The same Patricia Whitmore who was now HOA president was the same Patricia Whitmore who'd written the HOA covenants in the first place. She'd literally created the weapon she was using against me. Armed with this ammunition, I decided to attend my first HOA meeting. These things happen monthly in the community center, a building that used to be a one-room schoolhouse before they renovated it with marble floors and crystal chandeliers, because nothing says community spirit like spending $200,000 on a meeting room. I walked in wearing my cleanest work shirt and boots I'd actually scrubbed. 20-some neighbors sitting in folding chairs, most avoiding eye contact like I had some contagious farm disease. But I noticed something interesting. A few of the older residents, the ones who remembered when this was all farmland, gave me little nods of support. Patricia's holding court at the front, reviewing monthly financials like she's running IBM instead of a neighborhood HOA. When she sees me, that fake smile appears faster than a summer thunderstorm. "Mr. Morrison," she says, all honey and venom, "how nice of you to join us. I trust you've had time to consider our previous conversation about community standards." I stood up, holding my stack of documents. "Actually, I've been doing some research. Turns out your law firm created this HOA and wrote all its rules. That's fascinating, considering you're now using those same rules to extort money from me." The room went dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Patricia's smile disappeared like smoke in a hurricane. "I'm not sure what you're implying," she says, but her voice had lost that syrupy sweetness. "My professional qualifications are exactly why this community trusts me to maintain our standards. Standards that include filing false EPA complaints with technical language that could only come from someone with legal training," I replied. "Funny how that works." Now Patricia's face was turning red under that expensive makeup. Several neighbors started whispering among themselves. Not all of them looked happy with their HOA queen anymore. "Furthermore," I continued, "I find it interesting that you've already been in contact with county officials about my property. Makes a guy wonder what other plans you might have." That last part was pure bluff, but the way Patricia's eyes widened told me I'd hit pay dirt. She knew something about county planning that I didn't. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced, slamming her gavel like a judge dismissing court. "If you have personal grievances, Mr. Morrison, address them through proper legal channels." As people filed out, elderly Mary Beth Chen, one of the few neighbors who'd lived here before the development, stopped by my chair. "Your grandfather was a good man," she whispered. "Don't let that woman destroy what he built." That's when I realized this wasn't just about HOA fees anymore. Patricia had bigger plans for my land, and I was about to find out exactly how deep this conspiracy went. Mary Beth's words stuck with me like burrs on a work shirt. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention to what was happening around my property. And what I found made my grandfather's old stories about crooked politicians seem like bedtime fairy tales. Patricia wasn't just filing complaints. She was running a full-scale harassment campaign, 3 Surprise County Health Department inspections in 2 weeks, all mysteriously scheduled for days when I was at my construction job. Each one cost me half a day's pay to rush home and deal with inspectors looking for violations that didn't exist. The health department guy, poor bastard just doing his job, seemed as confused as I was. Someone filed a complaint about unsanitary livestock conditions, he told me, standing in my spotless barn that Earl had maintained like a hospital operating room. But honestly, Mr. Morrison, this is one of the cleanest operations I've seen. Clean or not, every inspection generated paperwork, and paperwork generated fees. $50 here, $75 there, death by 1,000 cuts. Just expensive enough to hurt, but not big enough to justify hiring a lawyer. But Patricia's biggest mistake was getting greedy. She started recruiting other HOA board members to file individual complaints. Noise violations from Karen Henderson in the Pink House. Noxious odors from Bob Mitchell, who drove the green Tesla. Property line disputes from 3 different neighbors, all filed within 24 hours of each other. That's when I decided to go treasure hunting in my grandfather's attic. Earl was a pack rat who never threw away a document in his life. Birth certificates from 1932, tax returns from the Eisenhower administration, every receipt for every nail he'd ever bought. But buried under decades of memories, I found something that made my heart pound like a bass drum at a rock concert. The original property survey from 1952, hand-drawn and signed by the county surveyor. And according to those faded pencil lines, my property extended 40 feet beyond where I'd always thought the fence line was. 40 feet that now included the HOA's precious community playground with its $15,000 swing set and rubber mulch that cost more per square foot than my living room carpet. I spread that yellowed paper across my kitchen table like I was planning a military invasion, cross-referenced it with the modern surveys from the development. Double-checked the property markers that were still embedded in old oak trees. No doubt about it. The Willowbrook Estates HOA had built their community playground on my land. Armed with this bombshell, I did what any red-blooded American would do in the digital age. I posted the survey comparison on the Willowbrook Estates Facebook group with a simple caption. Interesting discovery about property lines. Might want to double-check those HOA boundaries. The response was faster than a fox in a henhouse. Within 2 hours, I had 17 comments, 43 likes, and 3 private messages from neighbors suddenly very concerned about their own property lines. The best part? Patricia Whitmore's response in all caps. This is harassment and intimidation. I'm consulting my attorney. Nothing says guilty conscience like threatening to lawyer up over a Facebook post. But Patricia wasn't done playing dirty. 2 days after my social media revelation, I came home from work to find a sheriff's deputy waiting in my driveway, looking uncomfortable as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. "Mr. Morrison," he says, touching the brim of his hat like we're in some old Western movie. "I've got a complaint here that you've been threatening your neighbors. Ms. Whitmore filed for a restraining order." I could taste the irony in my mouth like pennies. "Threatening how, exactly?" He pulls out a folder thick as a phone book. "Says here you've been conducting a harassment campaign, posted threatening messages on social media, made intimidating statements about your legal options regarding their property." Legal options. That was Patricia's spin on me mentioning I'd found an old survey. In her world, discovering you own land that someone else built on was intimidation. The hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. Patricia showed up in a navy blue power suit that screamed serious attorney, flanked by 2 associates who looked like they'd stepped out of a legal drama TV show. I showed up in my cleanest work clothes with a folder full of documents and a growing understanding that I was about to get schooled in how the system really works. The judge, a tired-looking man who'd probably seen 1,000 petty neighbor disputes, listened to Patricia's presentation about my pattern of harassment and veiled threats against the community. She painted me as an unhinged farmer terrorizing innocent suburban families with my dangerous farm equipment and aggressive social media posts. When it was my turn to speak, I started to explain about the property survey and the harassment campaign against me. But the judge cut me off with a wave of his hand. Mr. Morrison, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order. You're not to contact any HOA board members or post about them on social media. Violation will result in immediate arrest. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt like David facing Goliath with a rubber slingshot. Patricia had outgunned me completely, and she knew it. As I passed her in the hallway, she leaned close enough that I could smell that expensive perfume again. "You should have taken the easy way," she whispered. "Now it's going to cost you everything." That's when I realized this wasn't just about property lines or HOA fees. Patricia Whitmore was playing a much bigger game, and I was about to find out exactly what she was really after. Patricia's restraining order was like handing a loaded gun to someone who'd already been shooting at you. Within a week, she'd weaponized that court document into a full-scale legal assault that would have made Sherman's march through Georgia look like a Sunday stroll. First came the motion to force sale of my property for public nuisance. Not just fines anymore. She wanted me gone completely. The legal filing was thicker than a Sunday newspaper and written in the kind of lawyer speak that makes your eyes cross. But the gist was simple. My farm was allegedly such a threat to public health and safety that the only solution was forced sale at auction. Then she brought in reinforcements. Whitmore and Associates suddenly had co-counsel from Nashville. Barnes, Mitchell & Cross, the kind of white-shoe law firm that charges more per hour than I made in a week. These weren't small-town lawyers playing neighborhood politics. These were legal predators who specialized in land acquisition. I scraped together what I could and hired Jimmy Fitzgerald, a local attorney who'd handled Earl's estate. Jimmy was a good man, honest, hard-working, the kind of lawyer who still believed in justice instead of billable hours. But watching him go up against Patricia's legal army was like watching a Little League pitcher face the New York Yankees. "Jake," he told me over coffee at the diner, spreading the legal documents across the table like battle plans. "I'll be straight with you. They're asking for an emergency hearing to seize your property within 30 days. The judge who signed the restraining order seems sympathetic to their community standards argument. 30 days, 70 years of family history, and they wanted to erase it in 30 days. That's when desperation drove me back to Earl's attic, searching through boxes I'd never bothered to open. Old Christmas decorations, faded photographs, receipt books from the 1960s. And buried at the bottom of a cardboard box marked "Important Papers," I found correspondence that stopped my heart cold. Letters from 1995, addressed to Earl Morrison from Tennessee Natural Gas Exploration Company. The letterhead was fancy, the language formal, but the message was crystal clear. They wanted to lease our mineral rights for natural gas drilling. I spread those 27-year-old letters across the kitchen table, hands shaking like leaves in a windstorm. According to the correspondence, Earl's property sat on top of what the geologists called significant shale gas reserves. The initial offer was for $50,000 just for the lease rights, plus royalties on anything they extracted. Earl had turned them down flat. His handwritten response, carbon copied in his neat farmer's cursive, was classic Earl Morrison. "Thank you for your interest, but this land is for growing things, not digging them up. The offer is declined." But here's the kicker. Those letters mentioned that recent advances in drilling technology had made previously uneconomical deposits suddenly very profitable. And that was in 1995. What would those same deposits be worth 30 years later? I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could about natural gas prices, fracking technology, and Tennessee drilling regulations. What I found made my grandfather's old refusal look like the smartest business decision in family history. Current natural gas prices were 3 times what they'd been in 1995, and new horizontal drilling techniques meant they could extract gas from formations that were impossible to reach back then. My 127 acres potentially sat on millions of dollars in natural gas. Armed with this revelation, I started making phone calls to modern drilling companies. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Tennessee Energy Partners offered to send a geologist within 48 hours. Appalachian Gas and Oil wanted to schedule a meeting ASAP. Every company I called was suddenly very interested in the Morrison family farm. But somehow Patricia found out about my drilling company meetings. I know because she showed up at my door the next morning earlier than usual, looking like she hadn't slept. Gone was the perfect hair and immaculate makeup. This was Patricia Whitmore with her mask slipping, and what I saw underneath wasn't pretty. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my kitchen without invitation. "About your recent business inquiries." I poured myself coffee, didn't offer her any. "I'm not supposed to be talking to you, remember? Something about a restraining order?" "Cut the crap, Morrison." Her voice had lost all pretense of southern sweetness. "I know you've been talking to gas companies. That's a mistake, a big mistake." "Funny thing about mistakes," I replied, leaning against my counter. "Seems like everyone's been making them lately, like building playgrounds on other people's property, or filing false EPA complaints, or maybe not mentioning that the land you're trying to steal sits on a natural gas gold mine." Patricia's face went white as fresh snow. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just about some HOA dispute anymore. There are people involved who don't take kindly to complications." "What people?" She stood up, straightening her jacket like armor. "Smart people. People with resources. People who've invested significant money in this area's development potential. You can take our generous offer and walk away with enough money to buy a nice little house somewhere else. Or you can fight us and lose everything." After she left, I sat in my kitchen staring at those old letters from Earl's box. My grandfather had known something was special about this land. He'd turned down money that could have changed his life because he understood that some things are worth more than cash. Now I was starting to understand why Patricia Whitmore wanted my farm so badly, and why she was willing to destroy my life to get it. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Patricia's threat about people with resources wasn't the kind of thing you ignore when you're dealing with millions of dollars in underground treasure. So I called my old Army buddy, Marcus Thompson, who'd been running a private investigation business in Nashville since we got out of the service. Marcus showed up 2 days later in a beat-up Ford pickup that looked about as threatening as a golden retriever, which was exactly the point. "In our line of work," he used to say, "the best surveillance vehicle is the one nobody notices." "Jake," he said, shaking my hand with that firm grip that brought back memories of desert patrols and midnight guard duty, "you always did know how to pick the interesting fights." Within 48 hours, Marcus had uncovered more dirt on Patricia Whitmore than a backhoe in a construction site. Turns out our HOA queen wasn't just a small-town attorney with big ambitions. She was up to her perfectly coiffed eyeballs in debt, desperation, and what Marcus called creative financial arrangements. "Your Ms. Whitmore has a gambling problem," Marcus told me, spreading photographs and financial documents across my kitchen table. "Atlantic City, Vegas, those riverboat casinos down in Mississippi. She's been hemorrhaging money for years." The numbers were staggering. Credit card debt north of $200,000, a second mortgage on her Nashville house, personal loans from sources that Marcus described as not the kind of people you want to owe money to. But the real smoking gun was buried in corporate filing documents that Marcus had pulled from the Secretary of State's office. Whitmore and Associates wasn't just the law firm that had handled Willowbrook Estates development. Patricia personally owned a 15% stake in the development company itself. "She's not just your HOA president," Marcus explained, pointing to a web of shell companies and financial connections that looked like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. "She's been planning this land grab for years. The HOA harassment, the legal pressure, all of it. It's designed to force you into selling at below market prices." Then Marcus dropped the real bombshell. He'd found a geological survey from 2018 commissioned by something called Tennessee Resource Development LLC, another shell company connected to Patricia's web of corporate entities. The survey covered a 12-square-mile area that included my farm and all of Willowbrook Estates. The estimated recoverable natural gas reserves were worth between $8 and $12 million. "Your grandfather's farm isn't just sitting on gas," Marcus said, pointing to the geological charts. "It's the access point for the entire deposit. Without your land, they can't get to any of it. That's why she's so desperate to get you out." I stared at those survey maps, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach and won the lottery at the same time. $12 million in natural gas, and Patricia Whitmore had been trying to steal it with $500 monthly HOA fees. "There's more," Marcus continued. "The Willowbrook Estates development, it's not really a housing development, it's a cover story. Those fancy houses are just window dressing for what's really going to be a natural gas extraction facility. The resort they're building, that's going to be the processing plant." Everything suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. The upscale houses to make the development look legitimate. The HOA to control the surrounding property. The systematic harassment to force out anyone who might ask inconvenient questions. Patricia hadn't just been stealing my land, she'd been running a con game that would have made P.T. Barnum proud. "What's our move?" I asked. Marcus grinned like a wolf who'd just spotted a particularly fat sheep. We're going to give Ms. Whitmore exactly what she's been asking for, a fight. But this time, we're going to fight on our terms. That night, I sat on Earl's old porch swing, listening to the creek babble and the cattle settling down for the evening. My grandfather had always said that the land would take care of the family if the family took care of the land. He just never mentioned that sometimes taking care of the land meant going to war with people who wanted to steal it. But war was exactly what Patricia Whitmore was about to get. Marcus's revelation changed everything. This wasn't David versus Goliath anymore. This was David versus Goliath, except David just found out he was sitting on a mountain of gold, and Goliath had been trying to steal it with a fake charity collection. Within 24 hours, I had a war council assembled in my kitchen that looked like something out of a political thriller. Marcus Thompson with his stack of surveillance photos and financial documents, Jimmy Fitzgerald with his legal briefs and Tennessee statute books, and my cousin Tommy Morrison, who'd driven down from Nashville where he worked as an investigative reporter for Channel 5 News. "All right," I said, spreading Earl's old survey maps next to Marcus's modern geological reports. "Patricia thinks she's playing chess while I'm playing checkers. Time to show her I've been playing poker." Our strategy had 3 prongs, like a military operation Earl would have appreciated. First, the legal offensive. Jimmy was filing motions faster than a machine gun fires bullets. A challenge to the HOA's authority over pre-existing property, a motion to dismiss all violation notices based on selective enforcement, and the big one, an ethics complaint with the Tennessee Bar Association for Patricia's undisclosed conflicts of interest. "Here's what most people don't know," Jimmy explained, pulling out a thick manual of legal ethics. "When a lawyer represents multiple parties with conflicting interests without disclosure, it's grounds for disbarment. Patricia representing both the HOA and the development company while personally profiting from forced land sales, that's about as unethical as it gets." Second, the financial investigation. Marcus was following the money trail like a bloodhound tracking an escaped convict. He'd traced Patricia's shell companies through 3 states and found connections to a Nashville development firm with ties to out-of-state energy companies. "She's not the mastermind," Marcus told us, pointing to a flowchart that looked like a corporate family tree designed by someone on hallucinogens. "She's middle management. The real money is coming from Apex Energy Solutions out of Houston. They've been buying up mineral rights across Tennessee through shell companies and local front people." The beauty of Marcus's investigation was that everything was documented through public records. Corporate filings, property transfers, even Patricia's gambling losses were tracked through casino loyalty programs that she'd stupidly signed up for using her real name. Third, the media strategy. Tommy had connections throughout Nashville's news media, and he was already pitching the story to his investigative team. "HOA corruption is hot right now," Tommy explained, scrolling through his phone for examples. "People are fed up with petty neighborhood dictators. But this isn't just HOA abuse. This is corporate fraud using HOA harassment as cover." That's front-page material. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We'd let Patricia continue thinking she was winning while we built an airtight case against her. Jimmy would keep fighting the legal battles publicly while quietly preparing the ethics complaint. Marcus would continue documenting Patricia's financial crimes, and Tommy would prepare a media expose timed for maximum impact. But we needed one more element: community support. That's where Mary Beth Chen became our secret weapon. Turns out the sweet elderly widow was a retired school principal who'd been organizing community events since before Patricia was born. Over coffee and homemade biscuits that could have won awards at the county fair, Mary Beth revealed that Patricia had been harassing other property owners too. "The Hendersons got fined for their vegetable garden being unsightly," Mary Beth told us, her voice carrying the righteous anger of someone who'd spent 40 years dealing with bullies. "Bob Mitchell was cited for his solar panels being the wrong color, and don't get me started on what she did to the widow Thompson about her late husband's workshop." Mary Beth's network of neighbors, the ones who remembered when this was all farmland and community meant something more than property values, was already organizing. Quietly, carefully, but organizing nonetheless. Meanwhile, I was preparing my own surprise. Using Earl's mineral rights documentation, I'd been negotiating with Tennessee Energy Partners for a legitimate drilling lease. Not the kind of extraction facility that Patricia's people wanted to build, but modern, environmentally responsible drilling that would leave the surface land untouched. The contract was sitting on my kitchen table, ready to sign. $12 million over 10 years with the first payment of $1.2 million due upon signing. Not only would it solve all my financial problems, but it would also make Patricia's entire scheme worthless. The beautiful thing, Marcus said, grinning like a cat who'd cornered a mouse, is that she's boxed herself in. The more pressure she puts on you, the more evidence we gather of her harassment campaign. And the restraining order prevents her from finding out what we're really planning. As our war council broke up that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just hope that I'd keep my land, but hope that justice might actually mean something in a world where money usually wins. Patricia Whitmore thought she was playing a game where she controlled all the rules. She was about to learn that some games don't end the way you expect. Patricia's overconfidence was starting to show like cracks in a dam about to burst. Maybe it was the gambling debts breathing down her neck, or maybe she could sense that her perfect little scheme was starting to unravel, but she began making the kind of desperate moves that separate the professionals from the amateurs. First, she accelerated her timeline. What had been a slow-burn harassment campaign suddenly shifted into overdrive. The county commission meeting to discuss my property's economic development potential got moved up by 3 weeks. Patricia started showing up at local business meetings, talking about jobs and tax revenue like she was running for mayor instead of trying to steal a farm. The presentation she gave to the Rotary Club would have been impressive if it hadn't been built on lies thicker than molasses. Charts showing projected employment numbers. Tax revenue estimates that made it sound like my little farm was going to single-handedly fund the county's budget. She even had architectural renderings of what the Tennessee Gateway Energy Center would look like, all glass and steel and modern efficiency, sitting right where Earl's barn currently stood. But Patricia's biggest mistake was underestimating how desperate she really was and how far she'd go to protect her scheme. I found out just how far when I came home from work on a Thursday evening to find my farmhouse had been burglarized. Not robbed, burglarized. They'd gone through the place like they were looking for something specific, and they'd found it. Every document related to Earl's estate, every piece of correspondence about mineral rights, every survey map and property deed, gone. The weird part? They left everything valuable. My grandfather's antique Winchester rifle still hung over the fireplace. Earl's coin collection sat untouched on the kitchen counter. Even my laptop and television were exactly where I'd left them. But every piece of paper that could prove my family's claim to mineral rights had vanished like smoke. The sheriff's deputy who took the report was the same guy who'd served me Patricia's restraining order. He walked through my house with the enthusiasm of someone investigating a missing cat, taking notes that probably said stuff was moved around and homeowner seems upset. "Any idea who might want to do this?" he asked, like he was reading from a script. "Yeah," I told him. "Someone who doesn't want me to have proof of my mineral rights." He gave me the kind of look that said he thought I'd been watching too many conspiracy movies. "Mr. Morrison, maybe you should consider that someone was looking for valuables and just made a mess. These rural break-ins happen all the time. Rural break-ins that only steal property documents." Right. But here's the thing about trying to destroy evidence in the digital age. It's harder than people think. I'd already scanned and uploaded copies of Earl's most important documents to a cloud storage account that Marcus had set up. The burglars got the originals, but the legal information was still safe. More importantly, they'd just committed a federal crime. Breaking and entering to interfere with a legal proceeding isn't just burglary, it's obstruction of justice. And thanks to the security cameras that Marcus had installed the week before, we had everything on video. Well, almost everything. The camera covering my back door had mysteriously malfunctioned just hours before the break-in. The kind of malfunction that happens when someone who knows about surveillance systems wants to create a blind spot. But the camera covering my driveway caught something interesting. A white BMW X5 parked down the road for 20 minutes during the time of the burglary. Patricia was getting sloppy, and sloppy criminals make the best kind of evidence. The next escalation came through the rumor mill that small towns specialize in. Anonymous flyers started appearing on car windshields around town, questioning my financial stability and mental state. Carefully worded to avoid outright libel, but designed to plant seeds of doubt about the crazy farmer who was interfering with economic development. The flyers mentioned my history of conflict with neighbors and pattern of harassment against community leaders. They talked about how opposing the energy development project would cost the county hundreds of jobs and millions in tax revenue. Classic divide and conquer tactics, making me the villain in my own story. But the rumor campaign backfired spectacularly when Mary Beth Chen got hold of one of the flyers. She recognized the premium paper stock and professional layout, the same kind Patricia's law firm used for their marketing materials. More importantly, she recognized the legal disclaimers at the bottom. written in the same lawyer speak that Patricia used in all her HOA communications. "Honey," Mary Beth told me over coffee, waving the flyer like evidence in a murder trial, "Patricia Whitmore may be a lawyer, but she's not very good at covering her tracks. This thing has her fingerprints all over it, figuratively speaking." That's when I realized Patricia wasn't just getting desperate, she was getting reckless. And reckless opponents make mistakes, the kind of mistakes that turn defense into offense and turn victims into victors. All I had to do was give her enough rope to hang herself. Fortunately, Patricia Whitmore seemed to have plenty of rope, and she was tying knots as fast as she could. Patricia's desperation reached full panic mode when she realized that her carefully orchestrated timeline was slipping away like sand through her fingers. The county commission meeting was scheduled for the following Friday, and she needed me gone before then. Not just quiet, not just compliant, completely gone. That's when she made her most dangerous mistake yet. On Monday morning, she filed an emergency motion claiming I posed an immediate danger to the community. The legal paperwork read like something out of a psychological thriller, painting me as an unhinged farmer with a history of violence and erratic behavior. She claimed I'd been making threats against neighbors, stockpiling weapons, and showing signs of increasing mental instability. The evidence? Completely fabricated. Affidavits from concerned neighbors describing incidents that never happened. Police reports that had been filed but never investigated. Even a psychiatric evaluation from a doctor I'd never met, claiming I suffered from paranoid delusions about property rights. Jimmy Fitzgerald called me at 6 a.m, his voice tight with worry. "Jake, they're asking for immediate seizure of your property pending a mental health evaluation. The hearing is this afternoon. They're not messing around anymore." But here's the thing about emergency motions. They have to be based on actual emergencies. And Patricia's fake emergency was about to collide with Marcus's very real evidence gathering. See, while Patricia was busy fabricating psychological evaluations, Marcus had been documenting her real mental state. The surveillance photos of her at 3 different casinos in the past month. The recorded phone calls where she'd lost her temper with creditors. The financial records showing increasingly erratic spending patterns that looked more like addiction than business strategy. "Your HOA president," Marcus told me, spreading out the latest batch of photographs, "has been gambling away money that doesn't belong to her. HOA funds, client escrow accounts, even her law firm's operating expenses. She's not just desperate, she's broke and scared." The emergency hearing was set for 2 o'clock that afternoon. Patricia showed up with her full legal team, looking like a prosecutor ready to put a serial killer behind bars. She'd even brought what appeared to be a court-appointed psychiatrist, ready to testify about my alleged mental deficiencies. But when Jimmy stood up to present our defense, he didn't talk about my mental state. Instead, he called Marcus to the witness stand. "Your Honor," Jimmy said, "we'd like to present evidence that this emergency motion is part of a systematic fraud designed to steal Mr. Morrison's property for personal gain." Marcus's testimony was like watching a controlled demolition. Bank records showing Patricia's gambling debts, corporate filings revealing her financial interest in the development company, surveillance photos documenting her visits to my property before the burglary, even recorded phone conversations where she'd discussed dealing with the Morrison problem with unknown associates. The judge, a different one this time since the original judge had suddenly recused himself for undisclosed reasons, listened to 3 hours of testimony with the expression of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion. But the real bombshell came when Tommy's journalist friend walked into the courtroom with a camera crew from Channel 5 News. Turns out emergency hearings about mental health evaluations are public record, and the media has every right to cover them. Patricia's face went white as fresh snow when she saw the cameras. Suddenly, her emergency motion about my dangerous mental state looked like what it really was, a desperate attempt to steal property while the cameras were rolling. "Your Honor," the judge said after hearing all the evidence, "I'm not only denying this emergency motion, I'm referring this entire matter to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation for criminal investigation. This court does not appreciate being used as a tool for what appears to be systematic fraud." As we walked out of the courthouse, Patricia cornered me in the hallway one last time. Her perfect composure was completely gone, replaced by the kind of wild-eyed desperation you see in cornered animals. "You have no idea what you've done," she hissed, loud enough for the news cameras to pick up. "This was your last chance to walk away with something. Now you're going to lose everything, and I mean everything." "Is that a threat, Ms. Whitmore?" Tommy asked, holding up his phone to record her response. Patricia realized she was being filmed and tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. Her threat against me was now on record, in public, in front of witnesses and cameras. That evening, the local news led with the story. HOA president accused of property fraud scheme. And Tommy's piece was devastating, laying out the entire conspiracy with the kind of clear, compelling narrative that makes complex legal issues understandable to ordinary people. But the best part was Patricia's reaction shot. That moment when she realized she'd been caught, filmed in perfect high definition and broadcast to every home in Middle Tennessee. As I sat on Earl's porch that night, listening to the creek and watching the fireflies dance around the barn, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, the calm before victory. Patricia Whitmore had played every card in her deck, and they'd all been jokers. Tomorrow was the county commission meeting, and I was finally ready to play my ace. The county courthouse had never seen a crowd like the one that packed every seat, lined every wall, and spilled out into the hallway on that Friday morning. Word had spread through social media faster than wildfire through dry grass, and it seemed like half of Middle Tennessee had shown up to watch Patricia Whitmore's empire crumble in real time. I walked into that courthouse carrying a leather briefcase that had belonged to my grandfather, the same one he'd used when he bought the farm in 1952. Inside were documents that would change everything. The signed drilling lease with Tennessee Energy Partners, Marcus's complete financial investigation, and Jimmy's ethics complaint against Patricia that was ready to file with the Tennessee Bar Association. Patricia was already at the front table, surrounded by her legal team like a general preparing for her last battle. She looked perfect as always. Navy blue power suit, every hair in place, makeup applied with surgical precision. But I could see the cracks in her armor, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes kept darting toward the packed gallery like she was looking for escape routes. The county commissioners filed in looking like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth. These were small-town politicians who'd signed up to debate road budgets and zoning variances, not navigate federal fraud investigations and statewide media attention. Commissioner Hayes, the chairman, gavelled the meeting to order with all the enthusiasm of a man attending his own funeral. "We're here to consider the economic development proposal for the Morrison property. Ms. Whitmore, you may present." Patricia stood up and launched into the performance of her life. Charts and graphs showing job creation numbers, tax revenue projections that made the development sound like the economic salvation of the entire county, artists' renderings of the gleaming Tennessee Gateway Energy Center that would bring prosperity to everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying that sweet southern honey that had fooled so many people for so long, "this represents a $12 million investment in our community's future. 200 permanent jobs, $5 million annually in tax revenue. The choice is simple: progress or stagnation." The crowd murmured appreciatively. Patricia's presentation was polished, professional, convincing. If you didn't know the truth, you'd think she was offering the deal of a lifetime. Then Commissioner Hayes called for public comments, and I stood up. "My name is Jake Morrison," I said, walking to the podium with Earl's briefcase. "I own the property you're discussing. I'd like to share some information that Ms. Whitmore may have forgotten to mention." I opened the briefcase and pulled out Marcus's financial investigation. "Patricia Whitmore owns 15% of the development company that's asking you to seize my land. She's been using her position as HOA president to harass me into selling at below-market prices, and she's been doing all of this while hiding the fact that my property sits on top of natural gas deposits worth over $10 million. The courtroom erupted like a stadium after a touchdown. Patricia shot to her feet, her face flushed red. "This is harassment. Mr. Morrison is under a restraining order." "Actually," Jimmy Fitzgerald said, standing up with a legal document, "that restraining order was dissolved this morning when you were charged with obstruction of justice." I pulled out the second bombshell, the signed drilling lease. "I've already leased my mineral rights to Tennessee Energy Partners, legal, environmentally responsible drilling that will generate $12 million over 10 years while preserving the surface land for farming. Ms. Whitmore's development proposal is not only fraudulent, it's unnecessary." The commissioners looked like they'd been hit by lightning. Commissioner Hayes leaned forward, studying the drilling contract I'd handed him. "Mr. Morrison, are you saying this development proposal was based on false information?" "I'm saying Patricia Whitmore has been running a con game to steal my family's land," I replied, "and I have the evidence to prove it." That's when the FBI agents identified themselves from the back of the room. Special Agent Martinez stepped forward, badge visible, speaking in the kind of calm, authoritative voice that makes guilty people panic. "Ms. Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and violation of federal civil rights statutes." Patricia's perfect composure finally shattered completely. "This is impossible. You can't do this. I have connections. You have the right to remain silent," Agent Martinez continued, as his partner moved behind Patricia with handcuffs. The courtroom exploded into chaos. News cameras captured every moment as Patricia Whitmore was led away in handcuffs, her legal team scrambling to distance themselves from their suddenly toxic client. But the moment that made it all worthwhile was when I looked up at the gallery and saw Mary Beth Chen leading a standing ovation that started with the older residents and spread through the entire crowd like a wave. As the noise died down, Commissioner Hayes banged his gavel one final time. "The economic development proposal is hereby withdrawn. Mr. Morrison, congratulations on your drilling lease. And Ms. Whitmore," he paused, looking at the empty chair where she'd been sitting, "Ms. Whitmore is no longer a problem." Walking out of that courthouse, I finally understood what my grandfather meant when he said the land would take care of the family if the family took care of the land. Sometimes taking care of the land means going to war for it. The aftermath of Patricia Whitmore's spectacular downfall played out like a feel-good movie, except this time the good guys actually won, and nobody had to pretend that justice is blind. Within 48 hours of her arrest, the dominoes started falling faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation froze all of Patricia's business accounts and began auditing every HOA transaction from the past 3 years. Turns out she'd been skimming association funds to pay her gambling debts, to the tune of nearly $200,000. Her law license was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal trial. The Nashville law firm that had been co-counsel suddenly discovered they had scheduling conflicts and withdrew from all related cases. Even her fancy BMW got repossessed, which gave me a particular kind of satisfaction every time I drove past the empty spot where she used to park it. The federal trial was swift and merciless. Patricia pled guilty to conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations in exchange for a 3-year sentence instead of the 10 she was facing. The judge ordered her to pay $2.3 million in restitution, money she didn't have, which meant she'd be paying it off for the rest of her natural life. But the real victory wasn't seeing Patricia in an orange jumpsuit. It was what happened to my community afterward. The gas drilling started 6 months later, and Tennessee Energy Partners kept every promise they'd made. Minimal environmental impact with horizontal drilling that barely touched the surface. 50 local jobs during the construction phase, 20 permanent positions afterward. And that first royalty check for $1.2 million hit my bank account exactly when they said it would. I used that money to do something Earl would have been proud of. I established the Earl Morrison Community Fund, dedicated to supporting family farms throughout Tennessee, scholarships for agricultural students at the university, low-interest loans for young farmers trying to buy their first land, and a legal defense fund for any landowner facing the kind of harassment I'd endured. The HOA dissolved itself by unanimous vote once Patricia was gone. Without her iron fist holding it together, the homeowners realized they didn't actually need 17 pages of rules about mailbox colors and approved shrub varieties. Mary Beth Chen was elected to head a new, simplified neighborhood association that focused on actual community needs instead of petty power games. I kept farming, because that's what Morrisons do. Expanded the operation with some of the royalty money, bought 40 more head of cattle, and restored Earl's old dairy barn to working condition. My girlfriend Sarah moved in last spring, and we're planning a wedding next fall right here on the farm, under the oak tree where Earl used to sit and watch the sunset. The annual Earl Morrison Harvest Festival has become the biggest community event in the county. 5,000 people showing up every October for bluegrass music, local food vendors, and a celebration of what small-town Tennessee used to be before developers started turning farmland into subdivisions with pretentious names. Patricia's story became a cautionary tale that spread far beyond our little corner of Tennessee. Tommy's investigation won a regional journalism award, and the documentary that Netflix made about the case turned me into something of a folk hero for property rights advocates. I still get emails from people facing similar HOA harassment, asking for advice on how to fight back. My advice is always the same. Document everything, know your rights, and never underestimate the power of community when people decide to stand together against bullies. The land that Earl Morrison bought with a handshake and a promise is still in the Morrison family, and it always will be. The drilling royalties ensure that future generations will never have to worry about medical debt or mortgage payments or HOA queens trying to steal what their ancestors built. But the best part of this whole story isn't the money or the justice or even the satisfaction of watching Patricia get what she deserved. It's sitting on Earl's old porch swing on a summer evening, listening to the creek babble and the cattle settling down for the night, knowing that some things in this world are still worth fighting for. Now, if you've got your own HOA nightmare story, drop it in the comments below. I want to hear how the petty dictators in your neighborhood are making life miserable for ordinary folks just trying to live in peace. And if this story fired you up, hit that subscribe button. I've got more David versus Goliath stories coming your way, because believe it or not, sometimes the little guy actually wins. Next week, how a retired teacher took down a corrupt school board and saved her town's only library. Trust me, you won't want to miss that one.